Have you ever wondered why the very first humans, millions of years before any known religion, looked at the world around them and sensed something greater than themselves? That instinct to search for meaning did not appear suddenly. It emerged slowly, shaped by fear, curiosity, survival, and a profound awareness of existence. When we examine the earliest traces of humanity, we find clues that suggest spirituality did not begin with temples or sacred books, but with a quiet and raw question, rising inside the mind of an ancient being. What am I? And what is this mysterious force that surrounds my life? Long before structured beliefs, rituals, or gods, early humans observed storms, darkness, fire, death, and the vast night sky. These events were overwhelming, impossible to control, and filled with power. To a mind still discovering itself, these forces were not just natural phenomena. They felt like signals, like whispers from an unseen world. This curiosity pushed our ancestors to interpret reality through something deeper than logic. It awakened a narrative sense, a spiritual instinct that shaped how they understood danger, hope, and purpose. The emergence of this awareness marked a turning point in human evolution. It was in these early moments that the first sanctuary of humanity began to take shape, not as a physical place, but as an inner landscape. The human mind, fragile yet imaginative, became the ground where spirituality first took root. And as these early perceptions grew stronger, they inspired new ways of thinking, new ways of reacting, and new interpretations of the mysteries surrounding them. This was the beginning of a journey that would later become religion, myth, and belief systems across the planet. But before we advance, I want to hear from you. Which moment in your life made you feel that same ancient question rising inside you? Leave a comment sharing your experience, your thoughts, or even a doubt that this opening awakened in you. Your perspective helps expand this conversation and strengthens our community. And while you are here, make sure you understand the importance of supporting this kind of content. So check if you are already subscribed to the channel and leave your like. Now, stay alert, because what comes next will deepen this path even further, revealing layers of human evolution that connect directly with the origins of our spirituality. As we move deeper into this ancient landscape, imagine the mind of an early hominid slowly awakening to perceptions that had never existed before. These beings were not yet capable of complex language, yet their senses were expanding. They began noticing patterns in nature, cycles of light and darkness, the behavior of animals, the shifting of seasons. Each rhythm carried meaning, even if they could not name it. This early sense of awareness created the foundation for something extraordinary, the perception of the invisible. It was not just about what they could touch or see, but about what they felt pressing against the edges of their understanding. In a world filled with danger, every sound in the night held significance. A rustle in the grass was not merely an animal passing by. It was a message that survival depended on interpreting signals beyond the visible. This sharpened intuition evolved into a primitive form of spiritual sensitivity. The unknown became a presence, a force that shaped their decisions. Over time, this presence was no longer just fear, but an impression that there was an unseen layer behind physical events. Early humans may not have spoken about spirits or energies, but the idea was already taking shape internally, forming the roots of symbolic thought. As cognitive abilities grew, these internal impressions became more detailed. A flash of lightning was not only a natural event, it carried weight, intention, perhaps even meaning. Rain was not merely water falling from the sky, but a gift or a warning. These interpretations did not arise from ignorance, but from the necessity to understand a world that constantly threatened their existence. Their survival depended on expanding their perception beyond the obvious, and this expansion opened space for the first glimpses of spiritual interpretation. This slow mental evolution created a bridge between the visible and the invisible. Early humans started associating emotions, sensations, and dreams with external forces. The boundary between inner and outer worlds blurred. A dream could influence how they moved the next day. A strange feeling could redirect their path through the forest. These subtle experiences nurtured the concept that reality was more than material. Step by step, the mind was learning to read meaning in every shadow, every sound, every unexpected event. And while these perceptions were still raw and undefined, they pushed humanity toward a deeper understanding of existence, shaping the earliest forms of belief before belief itself even had a name. Without realizing it, our ancestors were preparing the ground for an entirely new dimension of human life, one that would continue to evolve and reshape their world in profound ways. As early humans continued navigating a world ruled by uncertainty, one force shaped their spiritual awakening more than any other: fear. Not the shallow kind we feel in modern life, but a primal, overwhelming fear that decided life or death in seconds. Thunder, predators, darkness, illness, the unknown movements of the landscape, all of these carved deep emotional imprints into the minds of our ancestors. Yet fear alone does not explain the emergence of spirituality. What truly transformed them was the realization that survival required interpreting more than physical threats. They needed to understand the meaning behind events they could not control. In this struggle, early humans began to connect fear with patterns. When danger repeated itself, it suggested a cause. When the EEZ environment shifted suddenly, it suggested intention. These interpretations were the seeds of a new way of thinking. The world was no longer random. It felt guided by forces that operated beyond their senses. This shift in perception allowed fear to evolve into something far more complex: a search for explanation. And in that search, the first sparks of spiritual thought appeared. Survival demanded constant vigilance. A sudden silence in the forest meant something unusual was near: the cold. Wind before a storm carried more than temperature. It carried warning. These sensory experiences shaped a mental framework where invisible influences felt real and immediate. Through countless generations, the human brain adapted to anticipate them, transforming instinct into interpretation. What had once been simple reactions gradually became symbolic thinking. They began to imagine possibilities beyond the moment, attributing motives to natural forces, assigning meaning to the unpredictable. But this transformation was not driven only by fear. Hope also played a role. Early humans noticed that after every storm came calm, after every cold season came warmth, after every death came new life. These cycles suggested balance. They hinted that the same mysterious forces capable of destruction were also capable of providing safety and abundance. This duality encouraged our ancestors to engage emotionally with the world around them. The environment became a teacher, a threat, and a protector all at once. As their understanding deepened, fear and hope intertwined to shape a worldview where the invisible mattered just as much as what they could see. Their minds began to craft narratives that helped them navigate the chaos of existence. And even though these narratives were still unspoken, they guided decisions, strengthened social groups, and opened the door to the earliest forms of ritual behavior. Through this evolving blend of emotion, observation, and meaning, spirituality quietly took root in the human experience, preparing the ground for the next stage of its development. As the inner world of early humans expanded, their actions began to reflect this growing sense of meaning. Long before organized religion, before symbols were carved into stone or stories were passed through generations, these ancient communities were already experimenting with behaviors that resembled ritual. Their lives were shaped by harsh landscapes, unpredictable seasons, and fragile survival. In this unstable environment, certain gestures, patterns, and collective actions became their way of interacting with the unknown forces they believed influenced their fate. These were not yet ceremonies, but instinctive attempts to create order in a world that often felt overwhelming. Archaeological evidence suggests that even primitive species, such as Homo erectus and Neanderthals, arranged stones, kept specific objects, or returned repeatedly to certain locations. These behaviors may seem simple, but they marked an extraordinary cognitive leap. A place became more than a shelter. It became meaningful. An object became more than a tool. It became symbolic. These subtle shifts reveal the birth of intentionality, the awareness that actions could influence outcomes beyond the physical moment. This is where the first whispers of sacred behavior began to appear. One of the most compelling indicators of early spirituality is the deliberate care given to the dead. Graves containing tools, stones, pigments, or animal bones suggest that these communities believed something continued after physical life. The act of burying with intention implies a worldview that extended beyond immediate survival. It also reveals the emotional and symbolic complexity that was emerging. These gestures were silent expressions of belief, attempts to honor, protect, or guide someone into whatever mystery lay beyond. Such practices reflect more than grief. They reflect imagination, hope, and fear intertwined in a single act. As these behaviors evolved, collective gatherings around fire likely played a central role. Fire was warmth, safety, and illumination, but it was also mystery. Its unpredictable movement, its lifelike presence, and its ability to transform matter may have encouraged early humans to view it as something powerful and possibly spiritual. Around these flames, groups shared observations, emotions, and silent interpretations of the world. These shared moments strengthened social bonds, reinforced patterns of behavior, and transformed instinctive gestures into communal rituals. Over countless generations, these emerging practices shaped the early symbolic systems that would later give birth to myth, ceremony, and belief. Although still primitive and fragmented, these rituals marked a turning point in human consciousness, showing that the search for meaning was becoming a defining part of our species. And these early echoes of spirituality continue to shape the next chapters of human evolution, where imagination and belief grow even more intertwined with daily life. Before we move on, I want to hear your perspective. Which early ritual or symbolic behavior fascinates you the most, and why do you think it mattered so deeply to our ancestors? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can explore this journey together. As these early symbolic behaviors matured, a profound shift unfolded within the minds of ancient humans. The rise of consciousness was not abrupt. It was a slow and intricate awakening that allowed our ancestors to reflect on their own existence in ways no other species had achieved. With each generation, the human mind gained the ability to observe itself, to question emotions, to imagine future outcomes, and to construct internal stories that shaped the meaning of their experience. This blossoming of awareness became the engine that fueled the emergence of early spiritual narratives. In small communities, individuals began sharing their perceptions of unusual events, dreams, and internal sensations. What one person experienced alone could now be understood collectively, giving these early impressions a form that could be communicated, refined, and remembered. Through this exchange, their understanding of the world expanded into something richer than mere survival. They began associating natural events with internal states, linking emotional reactions to external forces. The mind was no longer just reacting, it was interpreting. And this interpretation laid the foundation for the earliest stories humanity ever created. These early narratives were not yet myths, but proto-stories shaped by instinct, emotion, and observation. A strange sound in the night might carry a meaning passed down through shared experience. An unexpected event could spark explanations that blended fear with imagination. Through these evolving interpretations, communities developed shared, mental models that helped them navigate uncertainty and reinforce group cohesion. The world became a tapestry woven from both physical and psychological threads, where meaning was discovered rather than invented. As abstract thinking grew stronger, humans began to understand time differently. They could recall the past, interpret the present, and anticipate the future. This expanded temporal awareness fueled even deeper forms of symbolic thought. Suddenly, a storm was not just a storm. It was part of a larger sequence that could reflect emotional or spiritual states. A successful hunt carried lessons that extended beyond technique, becoming an emblem of fortune, unity, or ancestral guidance. Experiences were no longer isolated events, but pieces of a narrative that shaped identity and purpose. With this new cognitive landscape, the seeds of spirituality found fertile ground. Early humans developed the capacity to imagine unseen forces and intangible realms. Their inner world gained depth and dimension, giving rise to explanations that transcended physical reality. These mental constructions were powerful tools. They helped individuals make sense of suffering, joy, loss, and hope. They offered coherence in a world defined by unpredictability. And as these shared interpretations strengthened, they became some of the earliest spiritual frameworks of human history. This growing narrative consciousness marked a decisive turning point, preparing ancient communities for more structured forms of belief that would eventually influence the rituals, symbols, and worldviews shaping the next stages of humanity's spiritual evolution. Among all the forces that shaped the spiritual imagination of early humans, none was more influential than the mystery of death. Confronting the loss of a member of the group forced ancient communities to grapple with a concept far more complex than danger or survival. Death was final, irreversible, and deeply unsettling. It disrupted social structures, challenged emotional bonds, and provoked questions that no visible element of the world could answer. This profound event pushed early humans to develop new layers of interpretation, marking a decisive turning point in the evolution of spiritual thought. When an individual who once breathed, moved, and interacted suddenly became motionless, something in the human mind recognized that an unseen transition had occurred. The body remained, but the presence seemed gone. This duality between physical remains and the disappearance of life created the earliest notion that existence contained an invisible component. Even without language to express it, early humans sensed a separation between the material and the immaterial. This realization became one of the strongest psychological roots for the development of belief in an afterlife, spirits, or continued existence beyond the physical world. Over time, responses to death evolved from simple reactions to structured practices. Bodies were placed in specific positions, surrounded by tools, pigments, or protective objects. These gestures suggest that early communities believed the deceased would journey into a different state of being. Such practices reflect more than mourning. They reveal an emerging worldview in which life and death were part of a larger continuum. The care invested in these burials signals a growing awareness of meaning, suggesting that death was not perceived as a disappearance, but as a passage. The emotional impact of death strengthened community bonds and encouraged shared interpretations of what occurred beyond the final breath. These collective reflections shaped early narratives that helped groups endure grief, uncertainty, and fear. By constructing internal explanations for loss, early humans created a psychological framework capable of transforming chaos into coherence. Their interpretations offered comfort, structure, and continuity in a world that constantly threatened their stability. This growing understanding of mortality deepened symbolic thought. Dreams in which the dead appeared may have reinforced the belief that existence continued in another realm. Natural cycles, such as the return of vegetation after winter or the rebirth of fire from embers, provided metaphors that made the concept of renewal conceivable. These patterns helped early humans imagine that death did not end experience, but transformed it. Through these reflections, the human mind expanded its spiritual horizon, preparing for more sophisticated belief systems. The way early humans responded to death reveals the immense cognitive and emotional complexity that was forming within them. It shows that spirituality was not a luxury of developed societies, but a natural and necessary response to the most fundamental mystery of existence. And as this understanding evolved, it formed one of the strongest foundations for the next stage of humanity's spiritual development. As early humans continued shaping their inner world of meaning, a powerful pattern began to emerge in the way they related to their surroundings. Nature was not a backdrop. It was a living force that dictated rhythm, survival, abundance, and destruction. For communities entirely dependent on the land, every shift in weather, every movement of animals, every cycle of growth and decay seemed infused with intention. Over generations, this constant interaction with the natural world gave rise to some of the earliest expressions of spiritual reverence. The sun, the moon, the wind, the rivers, and the forests became more than elements. They became presences, capable of influencing the destiny of the tribe. This perception was not built on superstition, but on observation. When rains came after rituals or collective actions, patterns appeared meaningful. When a river dried or a hunt failed, emotions intensified interpretations. Such experiences encouraged early humans to treat elements of nature as entities with personality, power, or will. They projected their emotional landscape onto the environment, forming a bridge between the visible world and the unseen intentions they believed shaped it. Through this lens, nature became the first great teacher, guiding actions, beliefs, and relationships within the group. As communities began attaching symbolic value to natural forces, they also developed gestures that resembled early acts of devotion. Offering food to a river, arranging stones, facing the sunrise, or pausing in silence before a massive tree, these behaviors were not random. They expressed gratitude, fear, and respect toward forces they felt dependent upon. With each passing generation, these gestures evolved into structured patterns, eventually forming the earliest forms of worship. Although still far from organized religion, these expressions revealed a growing desire to connect with something larger than themselves. These practices strengthened social unity. When communities gathered to honor nature together, they experienced a shared emotional resonance. The landscape echoed their internal narratives, and their collective imagination transformed ordinary places into meaningful spaces. A cave with unusual echoes might become a sacred shelter. A hill touched by the first light of dawn could become a place of significance. The environment was interpreted not through logic, but through the emotional and symbolic lens of a species learning to understand its place in the world. This emerging relationship with nature set the stage for the development of myths and more complex belief systems. It helped early humans define their identity, their values, and their role within a universe they were only beginning to interpret. And through these early acts of reverence, the foundation for future spiritual traditions was laid, shaping how humanity would perceive the sacred for thousands of generations. Before we advance, I would like to hear your perspective. Which force of nature do you believe would have held the greatest spiritual meaning for early humans, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can explore this idea together. As early humans deepened their relationship with the unseen world, something remarkable happened. Their ability to translate experience into language began weaving spirituality into the very fabric of culture. At first, their communication was limited to gestures, expressions, and simple sounds. But as cognitive abilities expanded, so did the complexity of their interactions. What began as isolated impressions or emotional reactions slowly evolved into shared narratives. These early forms of communication transformed spirituality from an individual perception into a collective inheritance. Language allowed communities to preserve reactions to unusual events, memorable dreams, or powerful encounters with nature. Instead of fading with the moment, these experiences could now be retold, reshaped, and passed from one generation to the next. With each retelling, the stories gained structure, detail, and symbolic weight. The invisible forces that once lived only in the mind of a single observer now lived within the group, forming a primitive mythology that guided behavior and influenced decisions. Through this process, spirituality became a shared lens through which reality was interpreted. In these early societies, stories served as tools for survival. A tale about an animal. Spirit might encode hunting strategies. A narrative about a storm-born force might teach caution or respect. Spiritual meaning became intertwined with practical knowledge, forming a bridge between imagination and lived experience. As stories circulated, they shaped collective identity and created a sense of belonging around shared beliefs. The tribe was no longer united only by blood or territory, but by a growing world of intangible meaning that connected their inner lives. Symbolic expression also expanded beyond spoken communication. Marks on cave walls, arrangements of stones, or patterns carved into objects became early attempts to externalize internal experiences. These symbols allowed spiritual ideas to exist outside the mind and persist beyond a single moment. They became anchors that helped communities revisit important concepts, reinforcing the continuity of belief. Even if the marks were simple, their purpose was profound. They allowed memory, meaning, and emotion to survive time. As these symbolic systems matured, early humans gained the ability to think more abstractly. They connected past events to future expectations and internal sensations to external forces. This cognitive leap transformed spirituality into a dynamic, evolving phenomenon. Myths grew more detailed, explanations more nuanced, and rituals more intentional. What began as instinctive interpretation became a structured cultural process through which generations learned how to navigate existence. Through language, story, and symbol, spirituality shifted from being a private perception to a shared cultural force. This collective imagination became one of humanity's most powerful tools, shaping how communities understood themselves, the world, and the mysteries they sought to explain. And through this emerging system of communication, the foundations of future religious traditions were quietly being constructed, long before civilization began carving them into stone. As spiritual ideas continued spreading through early communities, they began shaping something far greater than individual belief: social cohesion. The emerging sense of an unseen world gave groups a shared framework that explained danger, guided decisions, and strengthened emotional bonds. In a harsh environment where survival depended on cooperation, these shared beliefs became a powerful tool for unity. Spirituality was not just a set of ideas, it became the binding thread that held early societies together. When communities agreed that certain forces governed the world, they also agreed on how to act, how to respond to challenges, and how to interpret misfortune or success. This collective understanding reduced conflict and created predictability in a world full of uncertainty. A failed hunt was no longer just bad luck, It could be seen as a sign or warning. A sudden abundance of food might be understood as a blessing or reward. These interpretations encouraged the group to move as a unified organism, making decisions based on meaning rather than chaos. Shared spirituality also strengthened emotional resilience. In moments of loss or disaster, belief in invisible forces provided comfort and continuity. Instead of feeling isolated, individuals found support in a worldview that connected their experiences to something larger. This connection fostered empathy, trust, and cooperation, allowing groups to recover faster and face danger with greater confidence. The emotional stability created by shared meaning was a crucial factor in the survival of early human societies. As communities grew larger, spirituality helped define roles, responsibilities, and group identity. Certain individuals, those who were more observant, intuitive, or imaginative, became interpreters of signs and events. Their insights guided decisions about migration, hunting, and ritual behavior. Although these roles were still informal and fluid, they marked the beginning of social structures that would eventually evolve into spiritual leadership. Even in their simplest form, these roles reinforced cohesion by providing direction and reducing uncertainty. Spiritual beliefs also shaped communal memory. Events that carried emotional weight were preserved in shared narratives, reinforcing lessons about survival, cooperation, and morality. These stories became teaching tools for younger members, allowing values and strategies to pass seamlessly across generations. The tribe's Jikorpas Waitsi identity was no longer limited to its present members. It extended through time, shaped by the experiences and interpretations of those who came before. This continuity created a sense of belonging that anchored individuals to their community and to the invisible forces they believed guided their lives. Through these shared narratives, early spirituality became a stabilizing force, weaving meaning into daily existence and helping communities navigate a world filled with danger and opportunity. And as this collective imagination strengthened, it prepared humanity for the next great transformation, where the search for the sacred would take physical form in the earliest sanctuaries ever built. As the spiritual imagination of early humans expanded, the invisible world they sensed began taking physical form. The first sanctuaries of humanity were not monumental structures or carved temples. They were natural spaces transformed by meaning, caves with unusual acoustics, towering cliffs that caught the first light of dawn, or clearings shaped by ancient trees became places where the boundary between the material and the unseen felt thinner. These places were not chosen by logic, but by emotion, intuition, and generations of memory woven into the land. Here, early humans gathered to honor the mysterious forces they believed guided their lives. These sanctuaries acted as anchors for the community. They concentrated the group's stories, rituals, and shared fears into a single space. When individuals returned to these places, they were reconnecting not only with nature, but with the legacy of those who came before them. With each gathering, patterns solidified. Offerings were placed in specific spots, fires were lit in familiar circles, shadows on the cave walls fueled imagination, and echoes carried voices into darkness that felt alive. Over time, these spaces became the physical heart of the tribe's spiritual identity. The earliest artwork found in caves across the world reflects this intimate connection between belief and place. These images were more than decoration. They were attempts to communicate with forces beyond human reach. Paint, light, and movement created an experience that blurred the line between the seen and the unseen. In those moments, early humans stepped into a liminal world where the natural and the spiritual intertwined. These sanctuaries were not merely sites of ritual. They were environments where imagination, memory, and belief fused into something larger than life itself. Through these evolving practices, the idea of sacred space became deeply embedded in human consciousness. Sanctuaries helped communities understand their origins, define their values, and preserve the stories that shaped their identity. They offered continuity in a world ruled by uncertainty, giving structure to complex emotions and guiding the transition from instinctive spirituality to the earliest forms of ritual organization. These spaces were the first chapters in a long human journey toward meaning, purpose, and transcendence. And now that you have followed this entire path from the earliest sparks of awareness to the creation of humanity's first sanctuaries, I want to invite you to stay connected with this exploration. If this journey resonated with you, Make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you can continue discovering content that brings depth and clarity to the hidden chapters of human history. Leave a comment with the phrase "I am with you until the end," so I know you carried this journey all the way through. Your presence helps keep this space alive and growing. And if the ideas we explored today sparked something in you, give the video a like to strengthen this work and the community around it. There is a video right beside this one that continues this line of thought, expanding our understanding even further. Click and keep walking with me through the next step of this story.